Welcome, everybody. It's so good to see you. We have an really exciting program for you tonight. My name is David Plyler. I'm with the Concert Office in the Music Division at the Library of Congress. And it is my great pleasure, along with my colleague, Carolyn Ward-Bamford, who's our musical instrument curator, to be speaking with three members of the Pacifica Quartet. We have Austin Hartman right here, Mark Holloway, violist, and Brandon Vamos, a cellist. So please join me in welcoming them. I thought we'd just start with a kind of a conversation about this really incredible program that you put together, and then we can also eventually speak about the experiences that you've had here with playing the Stradivari instruments, which I know is a big draw for many people in our audience who may or may not have had a chance to hear them. But this is one of the few times you can hear them because they can only be played at the Library of Congress. So so maybe we can start a little bit about, if you want to tell us a bit about this kind of program, which seems to have a very American sort of theme to it.
Yeah, I can take that one. I'll be sharing a little bit of this from the stage as well. We've informally called this American Snapshots, as all the pieces that are on this program have some connection to a story or a vignette from the American experience. And so we have some of the more recognizable things like the beloved Dvorak American String Quartet, or the slow movement from the Barber String Quartet that we all know as the Barber Adagio for strings. But then on the first half, we're also doing some other pieces that have some interesting connection to things that were happening with individuals here in America. We have the George Walker piece that he wrote on the passing of his grandmother, who was formerly an enslaved individual, but he really wanted to pay tribute to her. Then we also have the George Crumb piece that he wrote as an anti-Vietnam War protest piece. And then we also have Ives' Second String Quartet, which is a wonderful piece that incorporates many tunes from the folk canon that we have, say, at the beginning of the 20th century. And so those things we could talk a little bit more at the concert about, but that's kind of the general theme and arc of the program. It's been a great privilege to present this, and we're glad to be bringing it here.
So, looking at the Walker first, this is it's such an interesting piece. It's his most popular piece, probably his most performed piece. And George, we had him actually just as if you'll excuse a little recollection here, about a dozen years ago. His son Gregory premiered a piece of his called Blue, using their Oberlin Betz, which was the copy of the Betz Stradivari instrument. Anyway, that was, I can't remember all the details.
2012, I think.
2012, I think it was, about 12 years ago. Wow.
Perfect.
Oh boy.
They were both here for that. It was wonderful.
Yeah. But it was great, and he's such an interesting man and such a nice person, and it was really a pleasure to get to hear his music, for the first time in that context. But this kind of has a nice pairing with the Barber. I think they were both originally called Molto Adagio, but then the George Walker kind of evolved into a string orchestra piece called Lyric. But then, but what draws you to this piece, or what would you like to say about the Walker?
Oh, it's just beautiful music. It's very touching. It's very heartfelt. It's there's simplicity is not quite the right word, but an honest directness about it. It's very tender. I think if you didn't know it was about his grandmother, let's say, you would imagine it's about someone dear to him, or something related to his family or something. There's a lot of love in it, and there's a glowing sort of love and optimism to it. It has tinges of sadness, and it sounds easy. There's a lot of sharps and flats in the piece, though, so it's not easy to play, which is also true about the Barber, come to think of it. But it's funny, you were talking about how he was here, and when I was a student at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, where Barber was a student and where my teacher taught me, he was also a student there with George Walker, and I remember him saying, there's a classmate of mine, George Walker, who wrote a viola sonata. It's quite a good piece, and it doesn't get played that much, and you should check it out. And I think they would keep in touch from time to time.
What's interesting is that I was reading in the notes that they both studied with the same teacher at Curtis. What was her name? Sirocco?
Scalero?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry.
Rosario? No, I'm trying to think. I don't know. the
Yeah,
name of it.
Rosario, or him. I don't know. Anyway, it was interesting that they both have that background, and then they write, in a way, comparable works. I mean, they're both incredibly expressive and lyrical, and they, like Mark says, they both have a simplicity harmonically that I think brings out that beauty.
I just checked that it's Scalero. Yeah, sorry. Pull up the glasses. That's how intense we are here. Well, this is a wonderful piece, and I think everybody's going to enjoy it. He packs a lot into a brief amount of time. And the next piece on the program is not going to be the one that's listed as the next piece in your program. We decided to change the order a little bit, so you're the first to know. The next piece of the program is going to be Ives' second string quartet. How many of you have heard this piece? Oh, we have one. Okay. We have a couple. What about the first quartet? More people have heard that piece than the second. It gets played a bit more with the Salvation Army component and things like that. But this piece is a really kind of astounding work in many different ways. And it's a little bit hard to. We won't go into all the details, but there's an element of one questions what is the piece, because he puts so much textual elements into the score, at least in the pencil score that dates from 1911 to 13 or so. That you don't hear it, you don't play it, you don't say it, all these things, but they add something to the piece that is almost inseparable from it. And so I'm curious how you have dealt with those things, or maybe you can give a few examples of some of those things that you find in the score, and just whatever you'd like to say about the piece.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out, to give you a little bit of backstory on it, the piece, well, let me take a step even further back by saying since Haydn's time, the quartet has always been seen as four individuals that converse and have dialogue together. And it's sort of that narrative that Ives runs with to include everything from conversation to discussion to argument to fighting to shaking hands, shutting up, walking up a mountain, and then seeing the firmament. Those are all of his words. And so that really, while as we would talk, the two quartets couldn't be more different. The first is very accessible, very tuneful. This one is more atonal and dissonant. However, I think the heart of the piece is really romantic in its programmatic conception, which is each movement advances this narrative of four players kind of basically going through life as a string quartet. There are, as David referred to, there are a lot of inside jokes. What we were talking about just this afternoon about, the one thing is Connie Mack sliding into home, which is
The manager of the Philadelphia Phillies or something, or whatever it was before the Phillies.
I'm impressed you're doing this. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
At least I knew it wasn't the Phillies. There we go.
Yeah, and so we've talked about what those characters mean. There's even a character that we were talking about, Rollo, that's my person. It's because my personality in the second movement, which is very much about a beat keeper, a timekeeper. We need to move this argument along. I get distracted by playing a violin cadenza that hopefully everybody will move off that topic, and then they shut me down. It's very it's a lot of fun.
He mentions, I think one of the things in the pencil score is like a la Misha Elman, like meaning a romantic, full, rich sound to contrast with the craggy sort of atonality in certain sections. He says, is it allegro confisto at some point? He wants it to be really, he's making up words to try to, words we've never seen before, just to try to give you an idea. There's one, I don't know, andante con scratchy, and it says as if you're tuning up the instrument, and so there's a lot of programmatic ideas. He quotes Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony and Brahms Symphony and Columbia Gem of the Ocean, and Beethoven 9, right? Yeah, so there's all these things kind of just come and go, and there are so many times where we're almost quite together, but one person has 1/16th note before, and if you didn't know that, you might think that we're not just quite together. It's constantly like this.
That could be the case, though.
that could be the case. If so, we'll let you know. But it's there's nothing like it. I've never played anything like this piece. It's such a unique voice, so ahead of its time, so modern. So just if you just think about him having made his living in insurance, that he could write exactly what he wanted to write without having to get money for it or please anyone in particular, or just to write whatever he thought was what he wanted to write.
He's also very proud of the piece. He wrote in his memoir that he felt like this is really something that he achieved. Also, Lou Harrison, the great composer, felt on hearing it, this is one of the finest pieces of chamber music that has happened in 50 years. So this is a piece that has been revered, and yet it's amazing. This piece is over 100 years old, and it's going to sound real fresh and real inventive and imaginative. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to play it. And of course, it's a big Ives year. But which anniversary was it? The 100th?
Sesquicentennial.
There we go. And so we just did both of the quartets along with the scherzo at Indiana University as part of a big festival of Ives, and it's been fun to revisit this piece and get to know it even better.
It's a little bizarre to be playing Ives on a Stradivari. It's like, when it says con scratchy, I don't really want to do it.
I was
Don't tell
wondering what
Carolyn.
Gisto would do.
I'm holding back a little bit, honestly, because I want to make sure I treat it right.
I mean, the second movement is a big argument, so we're just yelling at each other, and it's a little bit angry, But yeah, I felt that same way in rehearsal today as well. I was like, well, I'm angry, but I don't want to do that to the Strat. I'll be careful.
Well, just to give a little bit more context with this piece, so it was finished by 1913, but it was not published until 1954. So it was played a little bit. It's thought that Ives heard bits and pieces of it in the 30s, but otherwise it wasn't really addressed. And actually, Lou Harrison was one of the editors at one point who worked on kind of reconciling scores, and I think that his contributions led to updates by like 1970 or so. And so there's been lots of contributors over the years to try to get this piece to a state where you can kind of do something with it. And one of the things that I just want to mention also that you kind of miss with not seeing the score in front of you is that he does write in these little things that are they're just subtle things, but things like here we can agree on that. And suddenly you have a C major,
Yes, right.
chord, just briefly,
Yeah.
and then things move on. But there are these wonderful things that are just like he's speaking to the musicians kind of through this, and there's a little bit of a slightly misogynistic tone to
Yes.
what he's doing. Also, because he's talking about he was concerned about the emasculation of string quartet or chamber music and things like that, and he wanted to write a work in kind of working against that, and so that's in somewhat of a rage against that, and so that was his point of view, and so that was based on his going to quartet concerts and of course not having much of his music played at that point. So
The Kneisel Quartet was one, right?
yeah, exactly. So anyway, it's a fascinating piece. I'm so glad you're playing it because we don't get to hear it that often, and so it's really a pleasure. Then we moved to the George Crumb, who just passed away a couple of years ago, but has always been a friend of the Library of Congress. We premiered Ancient Voices of Children here, but we're going to hear Black Angels tonight, and we're happy to say that George Crumb's collection is at the Library of Congress, and so you can come check it out anytime you'd like, and get to know him as a composer and a person, and also to see his beautiful scores and the way that he constructs them. But this is such an interesting piece because it's like with his piano works that have amplified piano, he wanted to have an amplified kind of electric string quartet. And so when this piece came out, I think it galvanized a lot of musicians into wanting to play this kind of music and kind of go. But so maybe you can speak a bit about your experiences with the piece. And I believe that you may have had experience with George Crumb yourself, and so I'd be curious to hear about that.
Well, it's funny you say that because I remember as a student in the 80s, I guess it was how old at that point? 10, 15 years old, but it was such a cool piece for the college students, with the electric quartet and all the different sounds and things that are going on in this piece. And it's theatrical, and it was so different than even the other modern music that we were interested in at that time, but really kind of captured that imagination for young people.
I find it really interesting. Of course, when we're playing Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, we're thinking in the moment, and every performance is different. And there's, someone might take a little extra time somewhere they don't usually, or maybe the certain hall you're playing in has a little extra residence, so you wait a little longer before continuing. So there's always a little bit of an improvisatory feeling when you're playing chamber music or just music in general. But with this piece, it really feels improvisatory and so different every time we play it because there's, there are a lot of numbers. You have to wait 7 seconds here, 13 seconds there. You play for 7 seconds, and in the middle somebody comes in there, and also there's a squiggly line like this, and you have to start on a C and end on an F. But how you get there is so different every time, and depending on how that person hits the gong or hits the water glass, maybe you wait a little longer. So every performance really feels very different, and that's kind of fun. I get a lot of inspiration from jazz just as a listener, and so I feel a little bit like I can be improvisatory more so than usual in this piece.
I mean, as a player, it's really challenging because we're used to just focusing on our instrument. I play the cello and I practice every day and we go play the piece. In this piece, you're hitting gongs, you're bowing glasses, you're using thimbles on the strings, you're playing backwards where the bow is the opposite of the fingers, which is an incredibly challenging thing to do. He's trying to imitate the viol consort. And so there are times where you don't feel like you're playing in a string quartet. You're so active, and you've got to keep your brain ready for the next thing, pick up the maraca or whatever it is. So it's really pretty engaging for the performer and keeps you on your toes.
And because it's amplified, everything we do on stage, if we kick something, it's out there.
This is the one piece that they won't perform with our Strats. Just so you don't worry.
In a way, Crumb has, of course, this great percussion background and importance in the history of percussion music in the 20th and 21st centuries. And it kind of treats you as a percussionist, because percussionists are always the people who have to play every weird instrument that he throws at you. But there's something kind of refreshing. You're like one of them. And so the fact that you have to kind of master playing crystal glasses and bowing them together so precisely as you do, it's really like it's I don't know, it seems like it builds you up as a musician, I would imagine.
For sure.
Yeah, we had to ask, even like bowing a gong, it seems like the simple thing, but you have to like hit it at the right spot, and you have to hold on to it like this. And so I initially had to ask a percussionist, like, how do you do this effect? Because they utilize stuff like that. They have so many different talents, but it's not easy.
Yeah. And then, of course, the crystal glasses, just getting the right pitches. So, all of us so I think we all went into the Goodwill and took our bows and started bowing glasses to find the exact correct pitches, because the more water you add to it makes the sound harder to produce. So we're really looking for glasses that are about as pure in pitch as possible to get the most pure sound.
Get some funny looks, and I think I went and we were in
Like, here,
Target.
just take them all.
They went to Target.
Like, what are you doing there?
I was cheaper. I went to Goodwill and bought used glasses, and I brought a pencil just to clang the glass in here, and I would sort of wait until nobody else was in the row, and then I would do this because I don't look like a crazy person, like ding ding ding. If they're not quite the right pitch, you can add water to them to adjust the pitch slightly. Of course, you don't want to have to add too much water because I think it affects the resonance of the glass and the purity of the sound. And also, you don't want to have any water splashing on your bow as you're drawing it, because then it doesn't make it as what pitch it is, I guess. You won't hear anything.
Austin, if I recall correctly, did you have an experience working on this piece with George Crumb?
And I think, I did in my former quartet. I know Pacifica did as well. And both what a great guy, who not only taught us the piece, but just taught us the beauty of composition. He was a real great mentor, really great to work with. And it's very meaningful to present this piece as someone that has engaged with this piece with him. It feels personal in a really neat way. It was similar for you guys.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just amazing to have them, work on and ask him questions and see how, having him in the hall, adjusting the sound. He was very interested in the sound we were getting. He wanted it really loud. He kept on saying, it's got to be louder. It's got to fill up the space. It's got to be almost too intense, and that's something that never happens at a quartet concert. So it was interesting to see how, and then he was kind of even like, I always find working with composers, there's always sort of a improvisatory feel about like the music, like it's not set in stone. Mm-hmm. And I remember him saying, well, you could work on the thimbles, try it this way, maybe closer to this part of the fingerboard, and he was like just listening for a certain sound that maybe that changed from when he originally wrote the piece. So it was just very cool to have that experience.
We
with
were having
someone.
fun just before we came in here looking at his sketches of the piece. First of all, the piece itself, if we were to play off the parts, would look like oversized newspapers on our stand. So we found ways to make it so that we can see over the top and see each other. But you can see that what you see in the case in some of the more finished stuff is what we read off of. So we don't have individual parts like we usually play. We're playing off this sort of masterpiece of visual expression. So sometimes all the staffs will come together. Sometimes staff will be floating up here, and that's, and so it's a visual masterpiece as well as a musical one. And but as to Brandon's point, if you look in the case, we were all laughing. There's a place that he writes and crosses something out saying "too clever," and it must be some sort of joke he had with himself. So,
I mean, it's like really, it really is like art. I have it in my studio at school. I just have the big score out because it's just so fun to look at the way it's just comes together. I mean, the music makes perfect sense, but then you look at it and it's just so beautifully like his writing too, the way he shapes everything.
I'll say more about this at the concert, but it's based on a lot of numerology, and you can even see his computation in the sketches out there of how he gets from one section. A lot of 7 and 13; those were the two big numbers. 7 being sort of the number of completion, the God number. 13 being unlucky and more the evil number. And those two numbers war at each other. We even speak that number in many different languages: Swahili, Korean. What are all the Japanese, Russian, French?
Wow. Well, I mean, one last thing I would just mention is that we're speaking about him listening to the music while in the audience. It's really important to note that he is thinking about the sound always. I mean, every composer is, but there's something about his ability to create exactly the sounds he wants with percussion instruments to make certain types of orchestrational things happen. And one of the great moments, I think, or great sections, is the crystal glass bowing section, where the cello has this wonderful solo, and the cello sounds like kind of like the crystal glass, like you're a giant crystal glass that is resonating a bit more intensely than the rest. But it's this wonderful interaction of sounds and very intentional. I mean, clearly, but I always marvel at it, that how clear he was and how he was able to achieve that with acoustic means, even though this is amplified. But you know what I mean.
That's a beautiful movement.
Yeah. Maybe we should switch over. We can talk a little bit about the rest of the program as well, but maybe we should switch over. Carolyn, do you want to talk a bit about the instruments and see how they felt about that?
Yeah, it's been wonderful. They've been here all week, working really hard with them. The first part of the process is they just kind of get acquainted with the instruments and watching them go from their own instruments to our instruments. And, that's probably a pretty exciting yet daunting thing to do, to borrow an instrument for a few days and to give a concert on it. And the program is just so wonderful. And you hear these lush, beautiful pieces. You hear these, the Ives and not the crumb on the Strats, but, don't forget that when you see the bows in the water. So, how did you approach that? Coming here and thinking, oh, we're borrowing some instruments and giving a concert, and thinking about that ahead of time, or maybe you talk to people and their experience, and you've heard recordings in the past of other quartets here. Just give us a little of your perspective.
Well, I felt like a pianist for the first time, going and playing somebody else's instrument. That they do that all the time, and I had a tremendous respect for the fact that
they have to do
pianists
that
have to do this all the time. I think with that said, it was incredible to come in here and to. She was mentioning, for us, the history of this space, both growing up on the Juilliard Quartet recordings and the Budapest recordings live from the Library of Congress, having known these recordings and known these instruments sonically, and then to finally be able to enter the space and to be able to is for us, to play these instruments is for us a really moving experience. Mark, do you want to say a little bit about the violas? And
Yeah. First of all, I mean, I was always, since we found out we were invited here, I was looking forward to this so much because I have a lot of friends who have Strad violins or who play on, even a friend who plays on a Stradivari cello, and there are hundreds, 700, 800 of them, right? Violins that exist. But for violas, there are maybe 10 in the world. And 2 of them are right over here, you know? And so I'm not sure I've ever heard one live, maybe, that I could think of. And I certainly hadn't played on one before. And the only ones I'd ever seen were behind glass cases. And so when she opened it up and gave it to me, it was like this sort of feeling, you know. Of course, there's a reverence to it, but also a little bit of fear, you know. But I mean, the name Stradivari, it's something I've heard my entire life. I mean, it's seen as the pinnacle of the craft, and the greatest musicians and composers played and wrote for those instruments, you know. And so, in some way, I owe my entire life to him, you know, in a sense. And he's inspired and engendered unbelievable music and artistry and craftsmanship for hundreds of years. And so to be holding one of 10 in the world, and then you're going to hear it in a half an hour, it's sort of otherworldly. It's oddly emotional, actually.
I'm
Oh, that's
curious,
lovely.
how many cellos are there? Is it 60 something?
I hear numbers from 26 to 63.
Yeah.
We only have one. It's,
best one,
It's the best one, I must know. And then you take that back with you to school. You coach and teach at Indiana. 30 string quartets. That's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you bring that to your students, other sounds, other approaches, your experience, right? I would imagine.
Well, we were talking about this a little on the first day. Mark and I had the privilege of being here one day ahead of Brandon and Samin, and we had a lot of wonderful time to spend with the instruments. And it reminded me of the time in a lesson when I studied with Don Weilerstein, who was the first violinist of the Cleveland Quartet for a long time, and they traveled with the Paganini Strads for a long time. And he had one that I think he bought for $20,000 way back in the day. But at one of the lessons, he said, I think for you to really understand how to make sound, you need to play my violin to understand the Stradivarius sound. And I remember that was a very informative moment for me, just learning how to pull the sound and what the instrument could do, what the instrument was not designed to do. And I think those words came to me when we were playing these instruments, realizing that Stradivarius are special in the sense that they just soar their best when you let them do their thing. If you overplay them or try to bear down too much on them, they recede. And so the joy of playing the Strad for us is to really let them do what they're designed to do. And I think in some ways that sounds very simple, but as you know, we don't do this every day. So we're trying to learn a new, it's almost like going on a blind date.
Trying to unlearn something.
Yeah,
actually.
right.
Like,
Well said.
Since I was 8 years old, I'm used to just working really hard and trying to get a sound out of whatever box I had, and then every couple of years I'd get a better one and a better one and a better one. And the other day when I went from the Strad back to my viola, it's so hard to play, it doesn't speak, and up until then I liked my viola. Now I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah, this
Thanks,
is
Carolyn.
Sorry. You'll have to come back.
Okay, with pleasure.
That's very true.
Come
though.
back tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
We have a concert tomorrow night, right?
One more day. I mean, you see that with your students. They're playing on an instrument that's difficult to play, and it creates tension. Then they get a better instrument, and they become a better player because the instrument's letting them do things, and they're exploring. They're able to get different sounds, and they're working less hard. And then so that an instrument can actually make you approach the instrument in a better way, And then my first note playing that Strad was just kind of eye-opening because that first note, I didn't have to sink in as much. I just let my bow sit on the string and you play, and this unbelievably spinning resonance comes out of the instrument. And the one thing that's challenging the Strad is trying to play incredibly soft. I think that's a challenge because first of all, this hall is a beautiful hall. And then at least this cello, I think is such a soloistic instrument. You were saying the other day it should be out there playing Dvorak Concerto with a
I
big
said I
orchestra
wished I
behind
could
it.
hear it play. Yes, the cello can't leave the library, and I have always wished I could hear the Dvorak or the symphony. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But I can't.
Well, you kind of mentioned that it has this soloistic aspect and things, but what's it like playing together as an ensemble with these? Or because you also chose an interesting combination. Not that it's like we just don't have it as often of the two violins. So we'll hear the Castle Barco and the Ward, and so how does it feel playing together as an ensemble? I mean, I know how it sounds from an audience perspective, but
Yeah, I think I guess the best way to describe it, we have, if we have, let's say, 100 colors, the Strads provide us then another 150, 200 colors options. So I think as let's say musical artists that are working in, say oil painting, we just now have the ability to create an even richer shade of blue in the sky or more texture in the grass. The level of quality of these instruments just allow us to do things. And so it's neat to hear my colleagues do and try things that they maybe would shy away from doing on their instrument, but that they're really willing to take a chance to go out there with this instrument. So this evening is going to be fun to see what everybody decides to do in real time and to have a wonderful conversation around this. And yet, because we do this professionally all the time and we rehearse many, many hours every day, we can do that. We can navigate that. I think it would be a lot more challenging if we didn't do this every day, to come in as 4 individuals and try to sync up the Stradivarius sound. Even as great as those instruments are, it would be a challenge. I trust my colleagues very much, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do this evening.
Right?
Yeah, no pressure.
But it's wonderful for us as well to hear all these musicians like you, quartets like you coming in and playing on them, and we get to hear all these different colors as well. You put that beautifully. I really like that. I'm gonna use that one, I think. That's great.
well, yeah, I mean, you're in for a real treat. It's been really nice to sit in on the rehearsals and listen to things kind of come together. Definitely come together, not kind of. And so maybe we could just hit the second half a little bit just to talk about. You're also going to be playing the Barber Adagio, which we've kind of talked about a little bit, but I don't know how many of you here know the string quartet version? I mean, everybody knows so not too many actually, or a few. Okay, it's the same piece, but it's different. It's still something different, and you hear. I hear, at least in the way you play it, very different kind of colors that come through. I think even just kind of going backwards, like the last statement of the theme, with the way that the violin takes, there's just things about it that they're just slightly different from the way that you hear it in the string orchestra version. And I'm just, how is this a piece that you played? Do you usually play it separately? Do you sometimes play it with the Opus 11 full quartet?
This is actually the first year that we programmed the Barber, and we've been playing the whole quartet. So, and this is the first time we're just doing the Adagio. But I think with the string orchestra version, it is very different. I mean, this is a more intimate, I think even more, it's an intimate movement, but it's even more so as a string quartet, just 4 people on stage, and something I think it's one of the greatest things about string quartet is how personal it can be. And with these beautiful instruments in this beautiful hall, it's like it's a really touching kind of thing to be playing, and to get to do it. So yeah, I know it's
I think when we think about this piece, we often think about, say the Ormandy string sound, very robust and full. As Brendan's saying, I think there's something beautiful about its original design, the simplicity of the string quartet. And, it's interesting. The first page of the score is in the case out there of his manuscript. What I always found fascinating about this piece is the notation, the note values that Barber used. It's very large notes, like a lot of whole notes. And for me, I don't know how you guys feel. I feel it's very reminiscent of Gregorian chant. Like it feels to me, looks like on the page a lot like some of that older notation. And you've heard many different arrangements and conceptions of this piece where it has been done vocally, but to me, there's a singing quality to this movement. So if you can imagine this being sung by a small choir of singers singing sort of Renaissance style, I think. Because of those note values, that's sometimes a clue that I've looked into to think about how Barber conceived this. Certainly, it's no less dramatic but I think Brandon's word "personal" is a good one. I feel it's a very intimate, personal piece that it's always thrilling to step on stage and to listen to it and see it again.
Your mention of the medieval notation reminds me that all music was once Neum music.
That's right.
Sorry. But yeah,
Very good.
we do have a lot of Barber's materials at the Library of Congress, a good number that you can check out. And so you'll see it in the case as was mentioned. And maybe we should move, as I lose my voice suddenly, we should move on to the Dvorak, which is it's nicknamed the American, and so it fits in. And maybe you can speak about that, because that's such it's a piece that probably we're most familiar with as audience members. But yeah, I mean, but it seems like it fits in, especially with the tunes that we hear in the Ives and other things. It's just it fits.
Well, it's just one of our favorite pieces. We recorded it recently. We've been playing it a lot this season and last season. Of course, we played it years ago also, and yeah, it's one of the great string quartets that we're so lucky to have. Dvorak wrote a real handful of quartets, and this is the most well known. And it's just before he returned to what was Bohemia then, and this was written in Spillville, Iowa, where there was a Bohemian or Czech community in the 1890s. Or at least that's when he was there, and he wrote a few pieces there, including this is Opus 96, and Opus 97 is the E flat viola quintet. He wrote them both there, and then he even started one of the two late string quartets, which he finished when he got back to Bohemia, and he incorporated nature's sounds and this was it the scarlet tanager, this bird. There's a bird song in the third movement, and in this piece, in the very opening of the last movement, and also in the viola quintet, apparently he loved trains. He loved to watch train yards and industrial things like this, and so you can hear the rhythm of the trains. There's sort of African American folk music, not note for note, but an inspiration that he thought was really the future of American music. If we would all take inspiration from African American folk music and spirituals, and that this was something that was really unique to our culture that we could tap into to celebrate us. And so I think it's
there's a famous quote of him saying these exact words in the New York Herald in the 1890, and he really believed that, and he inspired a lot of great composers to write in that style. Harry Burleigh. I'm trying to think of some of the others. William Fisher Arms, I think, is another.
It's a beautiful slow movement too. And I grew up in the Midwest, and it starts off with the viola and second violin. It's sort of this lilting line that you hear throughout the entire movement in the viola, and it really reminds me of just like this kind of lonely, flat landscape that I'm sure he was living in Iowa. It just kind of just goes on, and then these beautiful melodies on top of it. So I don't know if that was that's my personal feeling about it when I hear it, but yeah, it's great.
Well, just to wrap up, since I know you need to get back and just kind of get ready, maybe could you just tell us a little bit about what's next on your agenda? Are you finishing up a tour? Any recording projects you want to dish about?
Yeah, well, this is our last concert before we take a vacation, which we.
Actually, we have one
Great.
more left tomorrow night.
Oh, I already bought my ticket. Oh, shoot. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we have a number of recording. We're in the process of finishing up. We're recording all of the Korngold string quartets along with the piano quintet and the sextet. So that will be coming out soon. With this American project, I'll say a little bit more about it at the concert, but we've put together a whole series of concerts and recordings to recognize in 2026 the 250th anniversary of America. And there's one more. So Mark mentioned the American that we just released in the second part of the American collection. The first was a disc with Anthony McGill, the New York Philharmonic principal clarinetist, that we did a whole host of actually 5 newly written clarinet quintets that we've recorded that each have a connection to, again, the American experience. One about Muhammad Ali, one about the 5 girls that were bombed in Alabama, the church bombing. A wonderful collection of pieces there. The second is called American Voices, where it features, again, the Dvorak American along with the Florence Price String Quartet, And then even a piece that we commissioned for children's choir and string quartet that deals with food insecurity, and the proceeds from that disc are going to help an organization in Chicago. We recorded with Uniting Voices, a Chicago-based children's choir, and it was a lovely project. And then the final disc is called American Portraits, and it's our idea that we will be presenting this in concert in the 2026 year to do a piece with narrator and string quartet. And so we have a whole number of commissions that'll be coming on that particular disc, along with the Barber String Quartet, and we will also be recording George Crumb as well.
Austin, would those pieces with narrator, would they sound good on Stradivari instruments?
I
What do
think
you
so.
think?
I think they would sound lovely.
You have to record them here.
Okay. You all heard her.
Well, that's wonderful. It makes me think I should pull out some corn gold for you to.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, we will.
Do you have any manuscripts here?
Yes, we do.
Ooh, that'd be fun. Well,
yeah.
tomorrow, 1 o'clock.
You bet. You bet. Well, I'm getting some feedback that means that we should probably close at this point. Please join me in thanking the members of Pacifica Quartet.
Thank you.